Well, thank you, Heather. Li-Fi, yes, Li-Fi. It maybe sounds odd in the ear. About me, been doing this for quite a while. On this particular topic, the reason I brought it forward is I was asked to write about Li-Fi as an emerging technology for one of the companies I write for, and it was kind of fascinating. Kind of fascinating to the point where it seemed worth sharing. I'm not sure why I'm getting the chat pop-ups. I don't usually get that, but that's okay. So again, we haven't even defined what Li-Fi is. We'll get there, but let me start off with a question. Those of you attending and anybody who ends up watching, why should you care about Li-Fi? You're Wi-Fi people, right? Why are we bothering with this thing? Well, I'm including me when I say you. Maybe we're not just Wi-Fi people. At least for me, I'm very much a wireless person as much as I am Wi-Fi. What I mean by that is I really need to understand a lot of wireless technologies, even if I'm not doing them all frequently. I certainly need to be aware of them. I need to be able to talk with some, framework of intelligence, or at least, um, anchoring of what technology is more suitable for another from time to time. I'm a technology person, probably just like everybody else that's watching is, right? So the more we can learn about different wireless technologies, the better I think we are at all of them in whatever capacity we have to touch all of them. Most of us are Wi-Fi doers primarily, but it all adds to the overall body of knowledge. And the T's at the bottom of the slide, there is something that Li-Fi and Wi-Fi both have in common. And we're going to find out what that is. And yes, the lie is light, if it's not obvious, but let's get there. But other than just being interested in yet another wireless technology, we also have to face the fact that if we don't embrace it, Chuck Norris might deliver a beatdown. And yes, his real name is Carlos Ray. He is known by Chuck to the world, but when he and I get together, I call him pork chop, and he asked me not to talk about it, so we'll just move on. So let me start you off thinking about what I'm calling other wireless technologies. There's a bunch of them, but the ones on the slide are what I seem to end up dealing with the most. The LoRaWAN, Bluetooth, Zigbee, CBRS, and then all kinds of radio meshy stuff for like building control and alarm systems, stuff in the 400 meg range primarily, but there is some other stuff. The one thing that's interesting about all of them, none of them are 802.11 based. They're all kind of they may be 802 based, but they're not 802.11 based. That's going to be a distinction we'll talk about a little bit. Um, but Li-Fi is. Li-Fi comes from the 802.11 family of standards. That alone is like, okay, that's interesting. And it is wireless. Specifically, it's 802.11bb. As I rip off Wikipedia here, a couple of interesting things about this. Yes, it is from the 802.11 family. Second line, 802.11bb defines an interoperable communications protocol, right? Just like 802.11 B, A, G, AC, right? We're talking about uh, wireless protocols. And if the devices don't do the protocol, if they don't do the things that by definition make them interoperable, they can't call themselves part of the standard. So 802.11bb seeks to unify this class of hardware devices that is using light to deliver access. But beyond access, there is something else we'll talk about. But this gets important. The whole interoperability thing gets important for a couple of slides down the road. So again, we think about the Wi-Fi Alliance on the wireless side. Their goal, other than to self-promote, their goal is wireless interoperability for Wi-Fi devices, right? That notion of interoperability is important when we talk about the standards. And we are using light. Middle paragraph there, you get a sense of promised speeds, and there is a little more to that too. Given that this is a 802.11 standard, it comes out of the IEEE, right? A lot of this stuff is commonality shared with Wi-Fi technologies. And then down at the bottom there, companies participating, blah, blah, blah. We're going to talk about companies a little bit down the road as well. But that one pure Li-Fi, they seem to be a big deal in this whole development of the standard. So there you go. It is an 802.11 technology, 802.11 double B, as we say down at the club. From a networking perspective, like the stuff that, if I was teaching basic networking, that I'm writing up on a chalkboard and I'm drawing out the layers and, we get to the MAC layer of the OSI model, that very fascinating 802 MAC layer that's shared across Ethernet, 802.3, it's shared across Wi-Fi wireless networks, the 802.11. It's shared with the personal area and the body area stuff. That's what BAN is for those not familiar. The hyper personal wearable devices, things that fall under different parts of the 802.15 framework. They all start with 802, which means they share that MAC layer. And that's what helps them all to be particularly good fit for each other. When you think about what a basic wireless access point was in the beginning before they started loading it up with BLE sensors and ultra wireless and climate sensors and all of that, basically an access point was a bridge between 802.11 and 802.3, wireless on one side, Ethernet on the other. And that shared MAC layer really help seal the deal and making them a good fit for each other. They both come from 802, and coming from 802 gives them commonality in that MAC layer, which makes it all a really good fit for each other. And again, I'm stressing this fundamental point because Li-Fi is 802.11 based, which means it really is within the overall framework of stuff that we deal with every day, even though it's new. It comes from a common place. It sounds exotic to the left brain, but when you start looking at it in those terms from the right brain, it's like, okay, okay, well, it's new, but it's not totally new, if you know what I'm saying. So the technical factoids aside that we just covered, on the particulars, right? So the standard, I believe, says it works at near infrared. And again, almost everything I say kind of either gets contradicted or amended in a couple of other slides because this is so new. But the standard, the 802.11 BB standard, calls it out, I believe, as near infrared. And then, there's the, nanometer waveband that it works in. It's only been ratified since 2023, so it really is new. It's not just, um, it's not just new and really hasn't gone anywhere. It's so new that it's still kind of playing out in a lot of directions. It very much is a niche thing or niche, however you pronounce it. I think niche is proper. I find myself saying niche, maybe out of ignorance, but whatever. It very much is a specialty thing at this point, which becomes interesting. And we'll cover that as well. Maybe client access won't be its main selling point, but that's what it was developed for. But that may not be where it gains its best traction. We're going to see that there is a market for Wi-Fi, although it is a small one, but everything needs to start somewhere, right? Back in the day, Wi-Fi was not a huge market either, and eventually it caught fire and off it went. Li-Fi will not be Wi-Fi in scope or popularity. Part of that is because Wi-Fi is so deeply entrenched, but that doesn't mean that Wi-Fi won't be interesting. So, and there certainly is potential. Like with any technology, there's potential, but it's using light. That's weird. It's different, right? So we all know, or we probably all know, fiber optic cable also uses light. Light is very powerful for what it can be used for, but this takes that whole notion of modulating light, like we do in fiber optic GBICs and at the phi layer and all that. It takes that notion and it puts it in the air, and that kind of makes your head hurt, or my head hurt, when I think about that a little bit. It's like one thing to have captive light that we're shooting down this long glass rod and it works its magic, but it's another thing to take that same notion of modulating light and put it out there in the air and have it usable. It's pretty wild stuff. From a modulation perspective, right? Again, it's 802.11. We expect to see some common verbiage, some common terms. When it comes to modulation, how the signal propagates, what's put in the air to convert, um, you know, backside data to usable stuff in the air that can be received and then demodulated and turned back into intelligence on the far side. Um, Higher data rates, just like with the 802.11 protocols, are going to use OFDM. And when I say OFDM variants, the white papers on this stuff are pretty fascinating. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of OFDM that get used. If you're interested, it's way too many constructs to even begin to try to outline. So we'll just reduce it to, we're using OFDM for the highest data rates. Lower data rates are going to be a lot simpler modulation, and there are dozens and dozens of modulations that correspond to different data rates and different applications, from what I can tell in this Li-Fi stuff. The notion of simple off-on modulation in the broadcast world, it's kind of the equivalent of AM radio, highs and lows, go flip your light switch on and off, and you're doing off-on modulation, right? Intensity modulation, you can take the brightness of the light and vary it, and that's actually a form of modulation. I'm really bright, I'm a little bit dimmer, I'm not quite as bright, I'm a little less dimmer. That, with each transmission, that actually equals intensity modulation. I'm watching some of the comments roll by, or the chat. It's pretty fascinating, the things that you guys are thinking about, and it is very thought-provoking. Color changes, right? Different colors have different wavelengths, and that can equal, when it's harnessed and used and controlled, and both sides are talking the same control language, changing your color of the light equals modulation. Now, again, the stuff is so new that I'm kind of having a hard time sorting through what is the actual standard versus what might be versus, yes, we contributed to the standard, but we still do things our own way a little bit. I think so much of this needs to be settled out in practicality, but it may end up mostly infrared, but there's going to be some visible and some near, or there are some visible and some near infrared light waves also in play, depending on the product set. And when I show you some of the products in a little bit, if you were to go through their data sheets, you'll see what I'm talking about. If you can find what specific light spectrum they play in, they actually use these terms near IR, IR, mostly IR, slightly visible. It's kind of all over the place. Um, but there's a lot of white papers out there on it. Kind of get into these specifics. Some of the promises, right? And this kind of goes back to what I showed you on the Wikipedia screen grab. 10 meg to 10 gig. Actually, sometimes it's actually lower, depending on the technology. It may be all that's needed is, low speed stuff. And the technology, I don't know if the standard allows for it, the BB standard, but the technology behind it certainly allows for lower data rates. And then they say supposedly it's up to like 9.6 gig. Other white papers will talk about hundreds of gigs. Yeah, we'll see. But the standard itself promises 10 to 9.6. Um, like everything, it wants to be a huge player in virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D stuff. And when I say like everything new, Wi-Fi 7 is going to be the grand fixer for all of your VR needs. 5G is going to be the big thing to get you going with all of your VR needs, right? VR seems to be just a marketer's absolute golden goose right now. If you want to sell something, tie it to VR. If you want to sell something, tie it to augmented reality, something in the network space. Those seem to be like almost a mandatory keyword for these technologies. The Li-Fi people, that has not been lost on them. They're it's one of the applications they're claiming as well, just kind of the world that we live in. It also promises to be extremely secure. And part of that is because it's confined to the very room that you're in, right? So light is not going to penetrate walls. So this is an in-room solution. We're not competing. You think about the word competition when it comes to wireless. Bluetooth competes with Wi-Fi, at least in 2.4. And if it's coordinated, you can reduce that competition, but you generally can't eliminate it. You can, optimize it so the least harm is done, but the physics are the physics. If two frequencies or two devices are using the same discrete frequency at any given point in time, there is interference. Is it going to be perceptible? Is it going to be performance impacting? Maybe, maybe not. But those nuances kind of go away when you're talking light versus RF. So it's not competing with the more what I call mainstream frequencies. I use the term near darkness. That's kind of like the human eye as it perceives it. And what's weird about that is we all perceive darkness slightly different. My eyes are getting older and they've never been great. One of my kids, it's like I'll swear it's dark and they can read the Coke bottle across the yard 500 feet and read me the label. And I'm thinking we're out there in the pitch black. It's just interesting, but these are, even though they're industry terms when it comes to Li-Fi, it really is kind of like based on the average person, if such a thing exists, their perception of darkness. So darkness, near darkness, and depending on what you read and what technology is in use, specifically whose technology is in use from the Li-Fi market, you get these weird variations. Does it matter? Just is what it is. I mean, part of understanding a technology is understanding the nuances, and at the end of it, a lot of those nuances really don't so much matter, except when it comes time for issues of compatibility, interoperability. Did I get the right product A that will work with product B? And then you start reading the fine print. And it's like, okay, this one doesn't work in darkness, and this one only works in near darkness, whatever. The point is, like, really does for this technology, even though the words don't sound all that significant, this is the language of Li-Fi. Beyond client access, that bottom bullet, the thing that really could make Li-Fi a big seller out there in the industry is the direct device-device connectivity. And up above, I said, it's extremely secure because it's an in-room technology only. Well, the fact that it's a short distance technology gets really interesting, like for aircraft. That's one of the scenarios you'll see floated, or in vehicles or whatever. If you can eliminate wiring and still get the data, this is data wiring, signal wiring, wiring that carries signals, not so much electrical wiring. Um, but if you can get devices that need to pass signals, but eliminate to be able to do so through light, but be able to eliminate wiring and still get the speeds needed to make everything work, that could save on weight. And again, aircraft, if you can save on weight, that's pretty good because the weight you save in wiring, especially when you think about there's, hundreds or thousands of pounds of wiring in a big aircraft. If you can knock some of that down, you gain fuel efficiency or you gain the ability to carry more cargo, whatever, kind of the butterfly effect of thinking about the elimination of wiring. And AV systems maybe get a lot neater, a lot less room for human error, a lot less potential for physical wiring to get damaged when things get moved around or serviced. So the direct connectivity thing, it's really not what Wi-Fi is setting out to do as an access technology, but just like with CBRS, right? Which is, I don't know, I find myself analogizing Li-Fi to CBRS, not from a technology perspective, but from a business application perspective. The nichiness of it. I find myself thinking that on occasion. The direct, device stuff could be what makes Li-Fi viable over time. Challenges to Li-Fi. Yes, it's new. Like I said, came out in 2023. New from a technology perspective usually equals exotic and pricey. It's really no different here. Pricey is easy to understand, even though it's nebulous. Costs a lot. Well, what's a lot? Yeah, more than I want to pay. I can get things that do the same for a lot cheaper. If you're talking about connecting devices, there's a whole bunch of ways to doing it that aren't as expensive as this new thing. That's the loose narrative behind the concept of priciness and exotic, arguably, in the technology realm. There's not a lot of it or them. That's what I mean by exotic. There's not a lot of adoption yet. It's different. You got to think about it a little bit before you jump in. It's like, how would I use this? How is this going to work for me? That's what I mean by exotic in the context of uh, Li-Fi. The second bullet again goes back to my CBRS ruminations. How do you position it effectively, right? This is a new technology. The people behind it want to sell it. They want to get it out there. So maybe its usability and its applicability gets overstated. And, this is wonderful and this is going to change access. Yeah, maybe, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that already does access and it's deeply, deeply rooted, like Wi-Fi. So why do I go to this? It's a really hard it's a really hard story to tell. I can't imagine being in that business. I've created something new and cool and I want to get it out there. How do you sell it? How do you effectively sell it, especially when it only works within a room and this and that? At the same time, it does have a place. It's just finding its place is going to take some time, and hopefully it doesn't fizzle out before that place is found. Again, going back to the short range, it's a limitation, but it also could be a plus when it comes to device to device connectivity. And then how much light is needed. It's going to work, across different product sets, especially the early ones. Even though we have a standard, if you go back to the early days of Wi-Fi, if anybody was around back then, there was a lot of devices that had no issues taking liberties and deviating from the standard. And that's where you had your turbo mode. The standard says you can get up to 52 megabits per second, invoke some products non-standard turbo mode, and you can supposedly double it. Not going to be compatible with a lot of things, but you can do all this crazy stuff. So the notion of, how much light do I need? How much intensity do I need? How bright does it need to be? How much power does that light require? Yeah, the standard covers all of this, but the early product sets, as with Wi-Fi, it's going to be interesting on how faithful they are to the standard and how well written the standard is. We see in Wi-Fi far too often. Well, we got a standard. If the device is standard, everything should be, or if the device is standard compliant, everything should be interoperable. There's so much that doesn't get tested under interoperability. We all stay employed trying to figure out why devices roam differently and why this didn't do that and why, this particular device doesn't work in the presence of OWE, but this one does, right? The standard, we all know or should know, the standard doesn't mean perfection by any way, shape, or form. So there's some challenges. Going to be interesting. So here's something to think about. The ultimate rogue device in your Wi-Fi environment, right? None of our WIPs or WIDS systems are, intrusion detection or prevention. There ain't nothing we've got out there that's going to be detecting light. So think about the classic example of rogues, right? I'm the copier repair guy, except I'm not. I'm incognito. And I come into your place of business and I pop in an AP. I find a functional network jack, Ethernet jack. I pop in my own AP and I put a little label on it that says life safety device, do not touch. And then I sneak back out to the parking lot and fire up my laptop and I'm hearing everything that is now that's on your network, but it's now also on my rogue AP, right? That's one of the typical textbook rogue cases. Now let's do something different. Let's take a Li-Fi AP. I'm still the same, sneaky guy. I sneak in, I get my Li-Fi AP and I put it on your network. But then I also put a phone across the room or within reach of that, and I hide the phone. And now I remote into that phone over 5G, and the phone is getting, Wi-Fi backhaul. Are you going to hear from my rogue device? Are you going to hear any of that on your detection stuff? I don't think so. Maybe it sounds far-fetched, but at the same time, if it's possible, it needs to be considered. If it's possible, the security people want to know about it. Um, so it's just one more, maybe far-fetched sounding thing to worry about with Wi-Fi. But again, it is technically possible. It's a new wrinkle for, stuff that we tend to have to worry about. So what is the market at this point, right? There's a website called lifi.co, Lifi Co, whatever. These are some of the technologies. And again, I scraped this right off of a web search. It probably came up in Bing. And I freely admit it, right? But there are names, there are multiple companies. This is not just a one person thing. That Pure Li-Fi seems to be, to me, very much seems to be one of the leaders in all of this, and their name will be on a lot of stuff, products, white pages, the initiative to get the standard to come to life. But they're not the only player in the space, as this list shows. So it's not just, you know, doesn't come out of one place. There are a lot of smart people um, thinking about Wi-Fi. There's a lot of science going on. There's a lot of development going on. Will it go anywhere? Sometimes a lot of smart people put out stuff that nobody really figures out how to use or take advantage of. That doesn't make the people behind it any less smart. But you can see there is a market, and will that market survive time? We'll see. And are there products? Well, yeah, there are actually. And, note the cute little Li-Fi icon like Chuck Norris had on his hat, right? Back a number of slides. Looks an awful lot like the Wi-Fi icon. Yeah, whatever. It feels a little cheesy, but whatever. But when it comes to the product, notice a couple of things if you can see it on these slides. The hardware itself doesn't look all that strange or exotic compared to Wi-Fi stuff. But look at the prices, right? This is not inexpensive, nor would we expect it to be, again, because it's new. It's different. It's, they got to recover those development dollars. There's not a lot of chipsets to be found. They're not mass producing them yet, right? There's a number of reasons why things start expensive and eventually become cheaper. But the starting prices on some of this is kind of over the top. Just that dongle for 199 bucks. If that was a Wi-Fi dongle, you're looking at probably, 20 to 30 bucks on Amazon. And that's for one of the latest and greatest. But the point is, there is a market. There are products. They are expensive. There's not a lot of them to pick from, but it's out there. And everything has to start somewhere. This is not throwing shade on the whole Wi-Fi industry or anything. It's just pointing out it's new, and this is where it's starting, and the prices reflect it. So some of my ponderings on the topic, you know, how standard is that standard? As I already mentioned, the early days of Wi-Fi were all over the place. Is Wi-Fi going to be the same thing? Right? Are you at risk of buying something that doesn't work with the other something that you already bought? I'm imagining, but I don't know. I just don't know enough about it, but I do know that I've been through other technologies that are guilty of that. There's a standard. Doesn't mean everything is going to be interoperable just because there is a standard. Again, I mentioned, CBRS a couple of times. To me, I'll just say it, in a lot of cases, CBRS, private 5G, very much is a solution looking for a problem. It has its use cases, but it can be over marketed, and it does start to feel like a solution that's looking for a problem when it's over marketed. It's really cool, but it's highly specialized. It's really tough to sell that. Once you boil off the hype and you start to think about, okay, I've only got so many budget dollars to spend. Do I want to go down this path of niche stuff to spend those budget dollars? It's a tough business model. It doesn't make the products any less cool or interesting, but from the selling and buying perspective, when the rubber meets the road, it's just challenging on both ends. It just is. So we'll see how Wi-Fi survives that part of the development. To me, it seems profoundly jammable. Um, light seems like it would be pretty easy to screw up. I could be wrong. I come from a background of science called electronic warfare. That's what I did in the military for a lot of years. So the word jamming, screwing up the signal, taking a signal somebody wants to use for something and basically screwing it up and maybe using it to your own advantage versus theirs. Um, this seems to be a really jammable, whether it's intentional or not, technology. And again, maybe I don't know enough about it. Um, and maybe I'm wrong, but I freely admit that, but I also know that the short distance thing is interesting. Somebody said, what if you're in a room full of mirrors? I really don't know. It's interesting. Um, but I do know that it's not just light screwing up light. You have to be in the same wavelength, just like with radio waves, right? My 2.4 is not going to screw up my 5. My 100 nanometer light waves are not going to be screwed up by a 1300 nanometer light wave. To jam, it's going to have to at least be the same light waves. And maybe that's what makes it unjammable. I don't know, but it is an interesting thing to ponder. And I can also see, if they don't exist yet, I can see Wi-Fi and Li-Fi working together. Maybe Wi-Fi is the backhaul for Li-Fi. I say that, and then it's like, okay, well, if I'm doing that, why bother with Li-Fi? Why not just use Wi-Fi? I don't know. I honestly don't. I'm just presenting you my thoughts and proclaiming them interesting. I hope you find them interesting. Just a couple of quick product shots as we wind down here. This is one example of what these things look like, that top photo detector. This company, Pure Li-Fi, this thing is actually one of the things that I believe they are trying to sell into other products. This part of it has been commoditized. Other people can buy this, I think they call it an antenna, something antenna, and that's going to be found in a lot of these products. Um, yeah, for what it's worth. Again, just the visual on the thing. And then a little bit of, simple architectural, how does it fit? Sometimes it's good to place yourself in the drawing and okay, it really is an access point. We're talking to my device and my device there's my Li-Fi sensors and we do talk back into the LAN. And, where the assumption is that you're either going to the internet or you're going to something internal, but it is, access. And here's access in motion or access, visualized for you. And it is fun to think about. It's cool to think about. Will it work? Will it stay viable? Yeah, we'll see. But it's here. And then my question to you as we close and open it up for discussion, how open the environments that either you run or you support, how open are they to non-Wi-Fi technology? I know for me, everybody tends to want to ram everything down the Wi-Fi funnel, whether it's the best technology or not. I often find myself saying Wi-Fi is not the best technology. For this, you're going to want to use LoRaWAN, and here's why. For this, you're going to want to do Zigbee, and here's why, right? It'll be interesting my challenge to myself, will I ever be able to say, you want to use Li-Fi for this, and here's why? I don't know. My mind is open to it. But I also know that this is going to be one more thing that's going to take some negotiation to get people to accept it over Wi-Fi. And part of that is Wi-Fi is so deeply, so deeply entrenched. But if Li-Fi has a compelling story, I need to learn it. And once I've learned it, I need to recognize where it will be the best technology, if it even survives and matures and develops. But in general, it's really hard to get people to see past Wi-Fi, whether the people be the end users wanting to do something or the people be, us, the wireless professionals. And with that, we go to the phones. Caller 6 from Detroit. What's on your mind?
Well, let's see here. Kenton had this in the chat and then popped it in the Q&A. Are there line of sight limitations?
There absolutely has to be line of sight limitations. I mean, the wall that you see in front of you is the line of sight
Mhm.
limitation on the inside. Um, certainly, and if you're outside, any wavefront is going to disperse into unusable, and that happens with, any technology, radar, Wi-Fi, whatever. You propagate, you're doing the wave thing, and eventually you peter out. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, I mean, how to answer the question scientifically or mathematically correctly, I don't know. It's going to depend on signal strength. It's going to depend on intensity. It's going to depend on wavelength. But yeah, absolutely. I just can't tell you what it is. I can't even pull up a chart that would estimate it. But I do know from you know being wirelessly knowledgeable and working in a whole bunch of different technologies, including, military stuff. It absolutely there absolutely are line of sight limitations. I just don't know what they are. I don't think it's a singularly answered question because it's going to depend on a bunch of factors, but absolutely it's going to be short, almost in all cases, and but still variable.
Mhm. Interesting one came through in the chat. What about Wi-Fi damaging people's eyes?
That's a great question. Obviously lasers can do damage. I actually, there is a stated value for, what light wavelengths you need to be careful of for eye damage. Again, lasers and all of that.
Mhm.
I would imagine that these are because they're near the visible spectrum. I have to imagine there's not a lot of safety concern for that. But I also will say I don't know. I'm not positive. I have to imagine just where it falls on the spectrum. There's not a lot of risk. But I would also look into it before I felt comfortable swearing by it.
Mhm. All right, Anders, this is an interesting one. I don't think this currently exists, but any whisperings of a Wi-Fi alliance?
I think that's what that Li-Fi Co is attempting to be. It's like the Bluetooth. What's the name of the Bluetooth? I don't think it's an alliance. I think it's some kind of working group, and other technologies have working groups without calling themselves an alliance. But I think that's what that Li-Fi dot co is trying to be.
Mhm.
I think it's the closest thing to that we have right now, and maybe that'll develop into something more formal. But again, this whole thing is, a year old, year and a half old, whatever. So remains to be seen. But right now, that is the de facto alliance for this technology, even though they're not going by that name.
All right. Anders has got two more in here. So,
That's enough out of Anders.
he's asking about interoperability. My right now is that you need to stick with one brand.
Yeah, again, the think about the early Wi-Fi standard. Interoperability was not guaranteed. I remember going to Walmart in the early days. I bought some 802.11b adapter, and I remember being astounded that the brand was something like BLITZZ, Blitz or something. And it was the same brand with the same logo that was on gas containers, plastic gas containers. It's like, what the hell? Blitz is selling Wi-Fi adapters and plastic gas containers. And it's like, whatever, that was all they had. One of the only ones they had, and probably I was being cheap. I took this thing home. It would not work with anything. And then, it said somewhere on the packaging was the, little Wi-Fi certified symbol. But then I read more and more online how that just didn't work for anybody. And, they met some basic interoperability thing that let them have the logo, but at the same time, the product was junk and it really didn't work. And it's just one example that comes to mind. I have to imagine early on, you're gonna have that same thing. I would not mix and match product sets if I had to pay the prices that these things cost yet myself.
Mhm. Okay, last one from Anders. Will full duplex work in Li-Fi?
If you wanted to, if you believe, Anders, if you believe it's working, then it's working.
Very good.
Well, let me back up. I don't think 802.11 allows for full duplex. I don't think that's in the standard. Certainly not in any Wi-Fi standard. I'm guessing for that to happen here, you would need two sets of transmitters and receivers that are both working at the same time, and nothing I've seen in the product sets indicate that anybody's going down that road. So I can speculate that no, but again, I would also paint my speculation with a robust coat of I got no friggin' clue.
Very good. And with that, it sounds like we'll be making t-shirts with "That's enough of Anders" on them, as per the request in the chat. You can get yours at sevensignal.com. Just kidding. We'll do
I think we should make Anders sit out the next two presentations.
Uh-oh. Well, I can't help you there. We'll all be sitting out the next two.
Well, there you go. So
So you're off the hook this time, Anders.
I know Anders personally, so anybody who thinks I'm actually being mean about it, I'm not. I'm being facetious, and thank you for the good questions and thoughts, Anders. Would be a much better way of approaching my reaction to Anders rather than being snarky because everybody might not know that I actually know him.